Hello, this is Theory of Obscurity. I am Chriddof.
And I am Applemask.
And we just send bits of media that can be anything from documents, bits of video on YouTube, video games, and anything like that.
Squid tentacles glued to cassette tapes.
Yes. So we've got two things. We've exchanged two things for each other. One is a computer game that I chose for Applemask, and we'll get to that second because I want to do the TV program first. I think the second thing is probably the most interesting thing. Is it be fair to say that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This video clip is punishingly dull in places, yeah.
Yes. So what Matthew picked out for me was the TSW Kids Show, from a Saturday morning show in the vein of something like Going Live or Tiz Was, that general sort of genre. And it's from 1986, I think.
February 1986, I believe,
February,
yes.
Yeah. And
last series.
Yes.
For what it's worth.
Yeah, I had a feeling it was because there was that sort of big shake-up of the schedules with all the stuff arriving on daytime and whatnot, and nighttime being encroached on and all that. This is well, why don't you tell me how you first got to know about Freeze Frame? Because I don't think you were old enough to really properly watch it at the time.
I wasn't old enough to really properly watch it. I was 3 when it finished, but I was vaguely aware of its existence, and I would have been in the room while it was on. But I would almost certainly have been watching Saturday Superstore instead on the other side, with Mike Reed and Sarah Green, because it was more interesting.
Yes, I mean it's no,
we haven't said the name of the show yet. It's Freeze Frame.
Oh God, yeah.
Which is a completely arbitrary name.
Freeze Frame, yeah, and it's there's a lot of like odd sort of things about it that really speaks of like the low budget and the how I feel that there were some people on the it's people are like doing the best they can, but it's not good enough. You know, it's honestly
You patronising bastard.
I'm so sorry.
Bloody Thames Television Bastard.
I'm sorry. Oh no, I'm sorry. But I know there is. But there are actually things I do really generally admire about this show. But beforehand, there was some really boring stuff, at least for me, to slog through. Then there was one other item almost after that, which is the kind of thing I feel like people like make fun of, as they kind of are a typically boring Saturday morning kids show feature. But I actually enjoyed it. So anyway, we'll start from the top. So,
yeah.
This is Freeze Frame from February '86, TSW only, I think, isn't it?
I think Channel showed it as well.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, everybody else showed Central's Saturday show, the one that was supposed to have Big Daddy on it.
Yes, yeah, I actually remember seeing the very last Saturday Starship, which is what it turned into.
Oh yeah, it was a Starship by then.
Yeah, and it was, by then it would have been Saturday Starship, and I think it ended also in that same year, and it had Bonnie Langford in it with Tommy Boyd. So one thing that's an immediate thing that sort of leapt out at me was that the TSW logo is like that nice mid-80s smoothly done CG one with everything like smoothly gliding the place, and it looks really nice. But I like the original ident too, but it's like it's got that really awkward bit where everything sort of goes at the end, in some versions, with like the green.
The entire version is just going boo. Really.
Well, true, but it's like I just like all that weird, like the stuff that only kind of sort of makes sense to me. Like there's a sea of static, and then some sort of claymation or something. Tunnel comes up. That's I think meant to be like a landmark, and then something else happens, and then and it turns into like a sort of very awkward.
The screen gets encased in a bubble, and the bubble turns into whatever the green things are in the logo.
Yeah, and So this has all been replaced with this nice, smooth, professional CG thing. And
normal people like things that make a bit more sense.
yeah, but then
I think it's one of the better CGI form-up idents of the period, because everybody was doing them after Channel 4.
Yeah.
And I think TSW's is one of the better ones, genuinely.
Yeah, I would say that, because Channel 4 is... Well, obviously, I remember that there's a lot of people who were scared by it, for a start. You get that scary logo thing from it.
I was.
Oh, yes, I know. But I know I've seen somebody else online actually say that.
Yeah.
And for 1982, it was impressive. But like by 86, it's starting to look a bit creaky, that Channel 4 logo. In a way. I mean, it's... Because, I mean, we've actually... it seems ridiculous to say, but like the TS one has a gradient in the background, you know?
Yeah.
And
it's got a bit of blue.
A bit of blue, yeah, and nice things. But yeah, we go from that ident and it goes straight into the titles, which I'm guessing hadn't been updated since it began, because it sort of has that...
just sort of edited around.
Yeah, they've probably edited it about a bit, but the logo is in that font, which I think is called Oxford, and I think it's called, and it's like that sort of hard to describe. It's a very, very 70s font indeed, which was still in use in the early 80s. And it
looks kind of like a heart monitor.
Yes. Yeah, it's got that line through all the letters. That was actually a feature of that font for some reason. And there is this kind of early 80s funk kind of thing goes, synth funk, sort of, which the presenters, who are called Ian and Carrie, are sort of jigging about a bit to.
South Hams funk.
Yes, and it wasn't the TSW like actual theme. You know, it's called That's Soul Right, because it has that
Soul Right
with W. Yeah,
TSW.
Yeah, and it has that sort of like Chris Morris in 1984 playing a bass guitar feel to it, you know.
It might very well have been by the same person.
Yeah, actually, it probably was, actually, come to think of it. But you have that, and so it's this odd, and also in the set, it's got that sort of. There's just some, I can't quite pinpoint why it's more early 80s than mid 80s, but it's got this sort of rainbow thing, and the logo is up made out of kind of a silver paper material. It just something
scaffolding.
Yeah, the scaffolding. It's sort of just something intangibly early 80s compared to what the actual year is. So Ian and Carrie, they're not actually. I don't think they. Well, funny enough, the same way I didn't introduce Freeze Frame by name, they don't introduce themselves by name either. They just sort of appear, because I guess, you know, they're expecting you to have been watching for, you know.
Well, yeah, there's only about 3,000 people will have ever seen it, so
yeah.
By now we are expected to be on first name terms.
Yeah, and they've got a local school in as the audience, somewhere from, I think it's Devon, I think.
Ivy Bridge,
okay.
The South Hams.
Right, okay. So
I think on this show it was almost always a school from the South Hams or in the vague vicinity of Plymouth.
Okay.
Because that was where they were filmed. Yeah,
that makes sense. And they have this... I was wondering whether this was live or whether it was pre-recorded. Because sometimes when you have... I remember there was this LWT show from like the very early 70s, sort of like a... sort of doing almost like what Tiz Was did, but without anything interesting or fun. It's like this, there's some clips shown of it on Bob Mills's in bed with me dinner, and it's got this horrible sort of 70s post-psychedelic underground comic kind of title sequence where there's which Bob Mills makes fun of, and then there's this absolute dimwit of a host with like massive lapels on his shirt and everything, and so that basically Bob Mills let slip there, like deliberate as part of a joke, that it was pre-recorded, and so I'm wondering whether they did the same thing or whether it was like genuinely live. I don't know if there's any way to tell.
I think it was probably pre-recorded.
Yeah.
If only because that would have been probably cheaper.
Yes, actually, yeah. yeah.
And this is only TSW.
Yeah. So one thing I immediately picked up on was that Carrie and Ian, they kind of got not very good chemistry in a way. It's kind of awkward. It's Carrie. I like Carrie, but I felt annoyed at Ian the more we went on with the show. Well, he kind of immediately loses me actually on a bit after the first main feature, which we'll get to in a moment. And he sort of, there's a very sort of snarky vibe to him, and he brightens up a bit during the musical bits, but otherwise it's just sort of, why am I even here? Whereas Carrie does seem to be making an effort, to like be a proper host,
For the benefit of listeners, this is Ian Calvert, who now presents her programme on Radio Devon, and Carrie Gray, who's now better known as Carrie Grant, the vocal coach from Fame Academy and various other things on BBC in the aughties. You can still see her on The One Show. Okay,
because I don't really watch Fame Academy or to be honest, anything on BBC One. I generally...
Well, neither do I, but I pick these things up by... Fame Academy in particular was briefly quite huge down here, just because... specifically where I live, just because one of the main candidates and eventual winner of Series 2 was from Truro. And it was just really exciting. They're acknowledging our existence.
Yeah. It's weird. It sort of reminds... Obviously, because I'm in the London area, obviously, like, everyone is just like London, 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 London all the time. Like, even from foreign media. But I do get sort of really generally annoyed at people when they don't acknowledge other parts of Britain, in foreign media, even though I'm not living there, and they don't, obviously they have their own problems to deal with other than pleasing, some random man in Epsom. I just get annoyed when like BuzzFeed do things like they run a thing where Americans have to try and read out Welsh place names. And, you get, like, them trying... Well, actually, that one is actually quite funny because they just show the place name, Llanfair and...
Llanfair.
Yeah, you know how else it goes. And it's extremely long, very famous name. And she literally goes, oh! She, claps her hands to her mouth with shock out seeing such a long name.
It's not like they haven't got Native American place names that are just that long.
Yeah, I mean, that is true. And also there is some evidence of Welsh ancestry of some original people came over in some parts of America. Like there's St. David something in some city somewhere. In, I think the south? I can't remember. Sometimes I watch the YouTuber Kim Justice, and she did this feature on the ZX Spectrum game of Orf Wiedersehen Pet. And it starts up, it's written in BASIC, it's made by a company called Tynesoft, and it starts off with the loading screen of a frowning Geminail, all digitized in 2-color ZX Spectrum graphics, just that. And it is just extraordinary. And I sometimes wonder, what must Americans think of this? What do they think of us and our early computer game industry?
Yeah.
But
we'll be getting to that.
We will. Yeah, we will. But in Freeze Frame, we so after the bit where they run down everything, there's a Madonna video, except we don't get to see it because this has been uploaded to Facebook by what's the name of the archives again?
Southwest Film and Television Archive, or Swifter.
Yes, they were the people who took over TSW's and Westwood's archive after they bit the dust, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So they've had to upload it to Facebook, and obviously they have to cut any kind of third-party stuff out. So you get this kind of brief white flash to sort of denote something's been edited out here. We go back to the show after that edit, and one thing, actually, I've got a note here. I have to, I have to say this actually. I wrote down here, Ian looks like an Amazon's Choice Richard Digance. I don't know if you get that, but
no, I get that. He does a bit. He's balding, but not with dignity.
Yes. He looks like he's going to whip out an acoustic guitar and sing a song about I don't know how it always rains when you go out on holiday or something like that. I don't know what. But something I noticed about Carrie is that she's wearing one of those hats that this is going to sound odd, but I associate those hats with Channel 4 arts programming from about 1988. It's like a hat that's sort of circular, flat top, and it's not very high.
Yeah.
There's no
sort of round pillbox.
Yeah. But except it's not like a normal pillbox. It's like something that for some reason I seem to remember loads of different people wearing on like arts programming in the late 80s, and I don't know why that was. I think it may have been something to do with the world music trend that was coming in at that time. I think I've heard that.
It might have been. Latin Quarter showed up on the same episode.
Yes.
Of course.
Yes, and
You might have had something to do with that, a whole subculture.
yeah, and they also mentioned that there's the purple is the new colour for spring or something, so it's all in like shades of purple and stuff like that, yeah.
Plymouth is not generally acknowledged as a fashion hotspot.
Just before we go to the Madonna thing, I just noticed in my notes that they signpost somebody, and it's actually quite an important guest, so they're kind of teasing it a bit throughout the whole thing, and it's a mystery person with their back to the camera, and they're clearly like a photographer of some kind, and it's pointed out in a way that deliberately doesn't introduce them. Like Ian just goes, oh, never mind him, he's just taking some photos, but it's like meant to, oh, this is like important, and it is actually quite
It's a mystery.
Yeah, but it is actually quite an interesting guest, actually, and especially for the time. But after the Madonna video,
I'm not entirely certain the children watching would have found him as interesting as you do.
Yes, that's the thing. Yeah, and that did occur to me, particularly during the bit where we're coming up, even through the like trying to make it appealing to children, and also the bit afterwards, immediately after that.
Yeah.
But that bit that I'm mentioning is the first proper feature after the video is a thing about the RNLI, or the Royal National Lifeboat Institution. And so they've got two blokes there, and they're like got like a huge like blow up special boat thing that you use for rescue missions to save dying people. Drowning, obviously.
Ian calls it a dinghy.
Yes, actually, yeah, I forgot that. I didn't wrote that.
Whose dinghy is that?
Yeah, it's dinghy, isn't it? And
it should be pronounced dinghy.
Yeah. But thing about the RNLI feature is that they're obviously a very important organisation who do vital work.
Yeah.
But it makes for insanely boring television.
It really does. They are an unavoidable charity down here.
Yeah. Yeah, and
them and the air ambulance.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously it is extremely important, but it's just not interesting. And they are doing their utmost to sort of get the kids interested in it. And maybe there were some kids watching who might have been, but for me, I
mean, they seem like nice guys.
Yes, but
they do their best to try and make it interesting, but it just, you can't force a sphere into. I don't know where I'm going with this metaphor.
Yeah, but I kind of get what you mean. But like this is the first proper feature, and it's quite a slog. And I feel like it's like the longest bit. I'm not sure. I didn't time it, but it felt like the longest bit.
It might be the longest bit, or it might just feel like the longest bit. It's difficult to tell.
Yeah. So there's one of the school children called Claire is dragged out to demonstrate some stuff they have to wear during work, and it's like they've had to put like an adult man-sized uniform on her, and of course she looks absolutely ridiculous, and she's sort of grin and bear it sort of thing, and they go on pointing out the things. This is the thing we use to like life jacket and all that business, and then. Then Claire eventually leaves, and I thought they were going to wrap it up, but it kind of just keeps going after that, and they instantly switch to, let me check my notes, there's like a film of an exercise where they capsize a boat and then have to escape it and then right it, and it's really hauntological. It's like hauntological as fuck, It's like, in a way that was starting to disappear a bit at this time. But it would hang around the TV for longer than it should have, because of people. TV channels would just repeat things, older things, for a lot longer.
We're still seeing public information films from the 70s in like the mid 90s, and it was very eerie by then.
Yes,
and very disconnected and very detaching.
Yeah, it was very. By the mid 90s, it was sort of, they were mainly shoved off to like either last thing at night on BBC One before they closed down, before News at 24 started. Either that, or be filling in random unsellable ad breaks on whatever ITV region you'd be in.
Sunday afternoons were a big one for a while down here.
Yes,
in the TSW region.
Yeah, of course, because in London,
on Channel 4.
Yeah, in London, it's just, they're generally able to sell almost anything for. One thing I remember, actually, I think it was about 1998 or 97. I was staying up quite late because I was about 18 years old.
Unusual.
That's why I started it, really, isn't it? There was this. I was watching the ITV morning news. So it was like about in the middle of that final slot before GMTV, as it was then. And so the bloke reading it, who's quite a famous person, because he was the first proper presenter seen on BBC Two. After there was there was that power cut thing, but like he was meant to be.
I know who you mean.
Yeah,
I haven't got his name, but I know who you mean.
Dennis something, I think. Yeah, but he's there, and he's somebody from the modern times, and like he's reading out the news, and he's reading out the news about like Tony Blair and other stuff. So he's like rooted in the now. And like, okay, and then he hands over to commercial break, and it's a very brief break, and it's a particular kind of 70s public information film about matches, about. It's one that you don't get to see often in general. I'm not sure if it's on the... I think it is on one of the Charlie DVDs, but it might be on the second one or something. And it's basically ends with these kids panicking after having set up something alight that's off screen. And it just sort of freezes, like the film...
Andy lights the fire.
Yes. And...
Yeah.
Oh, no, hang on. There's like a similar one. I just realised that where a kid lights a fire and then a girl screams, and there's something to do with the dandy. Is that the one you're thinking of? Because I'm...
Yeah.
Right, okay. This is a different one. I sort of slightly...
Is this the one with the freeze frame closing shot, the little girl superimposed on the fire?
Yes, and it's sort of the loop. There's like an audio...
And screaming.
And screaming. It just goes into like somebody whacks up, like a tape delay, and it just distorts. And that was... That I was hit with that like at a kind of a fragile moment at about like 5:45 a.m. I've been plunged back into 1973 and that final like I mean I was practically an adult by then, but like I was like a 2-year-old running away from the screen after like, in 1982 when I'd see something like that. It was that kind of like tightness in the chest, like that.
Yeah.
And it was. I remember there was a really nasty film splice in the copy they used, and so it just cuts all of a sudden, and then ITN resumed.
Just made it worse.
Yeah, it did make it worse, and like suddenly, like Dennis in like 1997 resumes, goes, "Welcome back," and I thought, "Oh God, you don't know what you missed."
Welcome back to 1997.
Yeah, exactly, and it was.
Well, you're not going to set any bloody fires, are you?
No, but
definitely. I've always thought that they should do with 5 o'clock in the morning news, that they should do something like what the BBC did with Working Lunch in the mid-90s. Just do a sort of very faintly but perceptibly tongue-in-cheek sort of a presentation of the news.
Yes, yeah.
Like Working Lunch with Adrian Childs always had just a faint attitude, or a faint sort of subliminal message saying, you don't really care about any of this, because this is business news bollocks, and it's all meaningless, so we're not going to treat it like life or death or anything.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've always thought they should do that for the 5 o'clock in the morning news, on the basis that nobody really cares at that time of day either.
No, No, it's...
It would just be a fun thing
Yeah.
for people who have to be awake at that time of day to share.
Yeah.
In the same way that working lunch was for sick children and the unemployed.
Yeah, I used to watch Working Lunch occasionally as an unemployed person, yeah. I think that's why... I think I like it now that Channel 4 shows like sitcoms as a kind of a replacement. Last time I noticed anyway. You had Frasier and Friends, just sort of on a perpetual loop, which...
I used to watch Cheers religiously at lunchtimes.
Yeah, but anyway, we better get back to 1980,
Yeah.
February 1986. So that film bit goes on, and then I'm going to read you the next 3 lines from my first draft of my notes. So hang on.
Right.
So it goes. First one is, "It just keeps going on," in all in caps. Second one was, I would have switched over to whatever was on BBC One by this point. And third one is, RNLI bloke keeps coughing, because he did. And there was actually a bit of a coughing fit at the beginning of the thing from some children, and he sort of does this, and maybe slightly nervous. It's a bit of a nervous cough. I mean, that's the terrible thing to pick him up on, obviously. I mean, the man saves lives.
Yeah.
But like, this is one of those things that reminds me of that French and Saunders parody of Saturday morning shows. Did you ever see that?
I probably did once, but I don't
It was
necessarily
the
remember
first.
in detail.
I think it was from the first series in '87, and you have this like they're doing a spaceship theme, like Saturday Starship, and the same year would be Get Fresh, I think.
Yeah.
And they're like Dawn and Jennifer are like, they're dressed in like these Bakerfall outfits, and they're like saying deliberate gobbledygook, and they've got like a oil painter who gets annoyed at them and stuff like that. It's just the same kind of thing, just like this, that they probably, in some ways they probably worked on some of this, because they had worked on at least one TVS kids program, like an afternoon CITV thing, but it was about a pirate radio station or something, or pirate TV station, and I've never seen it to this day. I think it's apparently I read up on TV Cream that this particular show they worked on unscripted, like people actually thought it was a genuine pirate TV station, even though it had the TVS logo in front of it. Yeah. So the RNLI thing is still going on. Storm Force is introduced, which makes me...
It's less exciting than it sounds.
Yes, it makes me think like a spin-off of Action Man, or aka Action Force, like it was, Storm Force, the greatest heroes of them all, or something like that. And
that's pretty good.
Thank you. It reminds, and they're all about like joining like clubs in a way that I generally don't know. Do kids even think of clubs that aren't in any kind of online capacity anymore? Because I remember this reminded me of joining 2 clubs that were advertised on TVAM, specifically with 2 cartoons that were shown on TVM. I joined the Pac-Man Club, just the cartoon. It wasn't like focused so much on the game. I just got news. It wasn't like focused on like the related games. I just remember getting a newsletter once that said, sadly, the current series of Pac-Man has finished on TVAM, and we don't know if it will return. So... yes, I have no idea what that was about. And there was also the Get Along gang.
Spoiler, it won't.
No, it didn't, no. I don't know if it was like Namco or Bally Midway or Ruby Spears who were in charge of that club. But there was also a Get Along gang club, which...
Oh, Christ.
Yeah. And there was... do you know that show?
I am familiar with the Get Along gang.
Yeah, they're like American greetings card thing, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's...
very, very large eyes.
Yeah, and quite anodyne. And I think I only joined because I like the theme tune. I like that. I would have really liked it if they just rebadged it, pivoted to being a Get Along Gang theme tune club. I would have loved that. Just get different versions of the lyrics, and like 12-inch remixes on cassette. But it's said that in the RNL, I think, still going on, both classes from the school have been signed up to Stormforce, apparently. And to join Stormforce, you have to write to Stormforce HQ, which it's like the headquarters in Marsk or something. It's like based in Poole in Dorset. And I mainly associate pool because I've been there as a child, where for some reason we went there for some sort of important occasion, and then my dad had to leave the hotel briefly to attend some vital rank Xerox meeting, which he couldn't like put off. And so me and my mum, and I'm like really tiny, this is like 84, 85, I think. And I remember getting a huge cramp while walking around whatever the shopping area in Poole was. And my mum bought me an A-Team annual from, I think, Marks and Spencer's, from when they used to do books under the St. Michael thing. I don't know if you...
Oh, yeah, they did do... There are St. Michael books. I've got a Doctor Who one.
Yeah, and they also did a Return of the Jedi one, which I had for a while.
Yeah. It's really weird seeing a supermarket logo on a book.
Yeah. On the other hand, though, they did sell roast chickens and coats in the same shop. So, you know.
Yeah, it always weirded me out in that respect as well, to be honest.
Yeah. In fact,
there were clothes shops and there were food shops, and then there was this one that was both.
Yes.
It felt like an indulgence.
Yes. But, so Carrie, I did note down that after they read out the thing, the caption for Stormforce HQ.
It starts to sound like a far-right paramilitary organisation.
I mean, that did also occur to me, but I didn't want to mention it. She says, so Carrie's like reading this out, and she says, well, we can all join up now and find out more about your work. And I've basically read it out like pretty much the way she says it in the programme. She doesn't sound very enthusiastic about the prospect of joining Stormforce. The main competition, and we're still not finished with the RNLI, and still not quite finished with Stormforce. This competition revolves around getting Stormforce membership. So you win VIP treatment, you get shown around a local boat place, and you see the boats. And the competition question, I think, seems to have been set by the RNLI guys themselves, because it's about... First of all, it's about some... obviously, it's to do with them, but like it's oddly phrased, like it's an official figure that they've looked up, and say, you can base a thing about that. But the thing is, it's about how many the question's phrased as how many lifeboats are there in Great Britain, the Channel Islands, and Ireland. And it just sounds a bit odd because they presumably excluded Northern Ireland due to the obvious. But it just sounds really odd. Like, if I was a kid, I'd wait, do they mean the Channel Islands and another island? And I might not make the connection between island. It just sounds a mess, basically.
Yeah. They could have just said the British Isles.
Yeah.
They might have worried that had excluded the Channel Islands.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Of course, because that would because they're being broadcast in Channel, aren't they?
Yeah, Channel's the only other franchise that's showing it.
Yeah. There is. It's also a multiple choice question, but it's got 4 choices instead of 3, and it's multiple choices. The rule of 3 applies to multiple choice questions the same way as it applies to jokes. 4 is too much.
Yeah, the rhythm's off.
Yeah, and also the choices are all multiples of 5. I don't know why I noticed that, but she says 50, 100, 200, or 500, and it's sort of a bit, Also, none of them are like really obviously wrong or obviously right ones, apart from the 51, obviously. Anyway, after that, we're finally finished with the whole thing. And again, I think this probably went on for 7 minutes, really, in real time. It was most likely the longest one, as we said. And Carrie hands directly over to John Miller of the 70s How show. And Ian is not happy about this. Anyone can clearly see that he's not happy about not getting to directly introduce this thing. And he also is resentful of John Miller for some reason. The thing...
Well, he was on network television.
Yes.
Ian Calvert never made it past TSW and Channel and BBC Radio Devon.
Yeah. So that's probably why, because I didn't know that background about the Radio Devon and everything. But so this segment is all about bottles, and this is the kind of thing that I think would also further lose the kids. Actually, as an adult, I did actually enjoy this because there's just all sorts of weird gadget. Like he finds an actual object called a corker, which I only knew as like an old-fashioned like exclamation. But it's like this massive thing that you need two hands to operate, like to put a cork back in a bottle to secure it to prevent it being corked.
He reveals himself to be a connoisseur of corkscrews.
Yes, yeah. There's that gadget where. It detects when the lip of it has detected bottle, then it activates a different gear or something, and that has some sort of benefit, which I'm not sure about. Apparently prevents it being corked, but then he takes it out the cork out and says, "Oh, I think it has been corked," or something like that. And anyway.
Who knew corks were so complicated?
Yes, yeah. I think I'm not sure, but I think I may be mixing this up with something else I saw. But I think he mentions at some point that. It's best to put corks in some water for a bit to prevent something happening.
Yeah, I think he does say that.
Yeah, I thought he said that. But yeah, I do like this bit because Miller is like a science teacher whose lessons you actually enjoy, despite instead of like everything else, which is awful. And like Ian is acting a bit like an annoying troublemaker who treats everything equally the same, like he thinks everything is shit, and like this is the rare lesson that's more like a treat, whereas everything else is something you suffer through, and Ian can't differentiate between anything. Another thing actually that suddenly struck me was that it was weird to hear mention of alcohol so openly on a kids show. I mean, they are talking about wine bottles, so it's unavoidable, but it's the kind of thing that would cause maybe some concern notes would be passed around,
Possibly now.
Yeah, now.
In 1986, they probably didn't care.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's that one of the earliest surviving recording of Tiswas, which is most of an edition from like 1975 or 6. There's one of the presenters who's not the usual presenter, like Tarrant is like on holiday. Like he has like a Campaign for Real Ale t-shirt on. Like a camera thing.
Yeah, I used a couple of clips from that.
Yeah. And I later saw
Watch and Smile.
Yes.
Now available for viewing.
Yes, absolutely. And God, I sound really patronising when I say yes, absolutely. Like, oh, I'll dine to let you plug your little thing, darling, or something like that. Sorry, but yeah. One thing actually, talking about bottles, is that you mentioned bottles with the marble stopper, which is just like the Ramune Japanese soda things I like, because I like anime. You can get these Japanese soda bottles that have the exact same marble stopper as he shows in a thing in that. And it's like an actual glass marble, and there's like a dent in the bottle, and it is as Ramune bottles are as difficult to open as it is for John Miller to open whatever other type of similar bottle that was. Like he's really like that.
Yeah.
They give you like this sort of push thing made out of plastic, which you have to punch out. And like the first time I ever opened one of those Ramune bottles in the house, because my mum was nearby and she thought like I'd dropped the bottle on the floor because it was just this clonk and there's a bit where he leads into the final bit of the segment. Is how do you open a particular type of bottle? And Ian goes, you could break it over someone's head like in films, and then he imitates a smashing sound like one of the kids in the audience would do. Like he literally just goes with the hand motion and everything, and that did make me feel quite embarrassed watching that. I would have liked that more if it wasn't for Ian, because he's envious, of course, a bit Alan Partridge sort of thing going on. So again, just before they link back to Carrie with her makeup thing, there's a brief cutaway which shows the mystery guest again, and he's taking a photograph. They link back to Carrie and they introduce a Porky Pig cartoon called Paying the Piper, which I looked it up. It's from 1949, so it's one of the classic ones, as opposed to something from like the late. It'd be more usually like one of the 60s one with the weird version of the theme tune.
Yeah, the geometric spinning
and Daffy Duck and Speedy Gonzales, and it's just tedious,
And worst of all, it's got the W7 logo instead of Warner's.
Yeah.
Instead of a proper Warner shield. That is a warning sign.
Yeah, like that you get that sort of before the.
Yeah, that Never understood what that was for either.
Carrie introduces this Porky Pig cartoon, and she does it with the help of Claire, who's being given this opportunity as a kind of way to make up for the adult-sized uniform fiasco.
Yeah,
and that's nice actually because
she's been given a bit on this Saturday morning show in order to make up for the other bit on the Saturday morning show that she had to do.
Yes, yeah, it's quite funny how it works out. But yeah, she gets to say Porky Pig and paying the piper, and then then after the cartoon we have the band. And first band, Latin Quarter come on a bit later, and I looked into this quite heavily into this band. And actually, first of all, I should note, if anybody is planning on watching this full thing, I should note that Ian makes a now unpleasant reference to the Beast of Leeds. So,
oh God, yeah,
there's just brief 2-second things. They just but
yeah.
Ian introduces somebody who at first I thought it was like a solo artist with a backing group called Floyd Joy, but it turns out it's actually a band called Floy Joy without a D at the end.
Floyd Joy,
yeah.
After the Supreme song.
Ah, of course. Right, okay, yeah. And turns out they were the people who did that Week in the Presence of Beauty song. Because this is the one, they're actually performing that here. I think it's the one.
Before Alison Moyet.
Yeah, and then Alison Moyet picked it up, and then years later she said, I hated that. I picked it because I only wanted to have a hit with it, and I hate it. It's like, that must really sting for those people. I felt so sorry for them. But yeah, Ian misintroduces it as In the Presence of Beauty, and I just thought, oh, that sounds familiar. And then, of course, he missed out the word week for whatever reason. At this point, it should be noted that they formed in Sheffield in 1983. By early 86, they were signed to Virgin Records. They've been signed for about a year and a half, I think. And only one original member of the group was in it at this point, and they were into their third lineup, I believe. I know it kind of... for something that's so up and coming as somebody who... I mean, it's 86 and 83, which in the term of the 80s is a long time, but even so, it seems faintly, weirdly Spinal Tap-ish in a way to do...
For almost an entire band to leave and be replaced.
Yeah, and it turns out that Carrie had her first show on the previous time, which was presumably the second lineup maybe, which is just one of those interesting but ultimately meaningless bits of synchronicity.
Yeah.
And
a completely different band except for one person.
Yeah. Something I noted down there here, there's always something faintly silly on these shows when they're clearly much more adult aimed band, or at least a band aimed at like teenagers and like people in their 20s, which would have been the thing for the 80s. They end up on like shows like this, and it just feels odd to see them having to perform in front of a child audience who just have to cheer at anything put in front of them. It just feels absurd in a really awkward and embarrassing way.
I always enjoyed that, even as a child. I can sense that, and I always enjoyed it. Of course, number 73 tended to do it deliberately and end up with things like Iggy Pop violating a teddy bear.
Yes. Who else was... they actually got Alien Sex Fiend on there, I believe. Yeah, and a lot of goth bands they seem to get on there. At this point, I think in real time we're about up to half an hour of total screen time, and we don't get, of course, to see the performance, because that counts obviously as like a third party bit of content, and they have to slice that out. And of course, Ian asks Carrie what she thinks. She says something about, I was boogieing away to it. And I noticed Ian's, again, as I said before, Ian slightly perks up at the musical bits. He's clearly a bit of a muso. And am I right about this? Because I never heard his radio show.
No, you're all right about this. He's more usually a radio DJ. And he's better at being a radio DJ.
Yeah, so... she says that she thinks the song will be a hit, and it was a hit, but for Alison Moyet, of course. And we then segue. What is that word? Segue. I don't know what the word is. Segue into the spring makeup thing. And Carrie, apparently this week Carrie was made up in that specific way, because apparently she doesn't look like that all the time. I just thought that was just her personal style, but it turns out that it's all, for this show and for this segment especially. And her makeup was done by
more usually of late. Now she's Cary Grant. She has bottle red hair. She looks like a slightly curvier Sarah Kay would, if that means anything to you.
Yes, I too noticed Sarah Kay Wood in the 90s.
Yes. I am familiar with this reference.
But Carrie was made up by I assume it's one of TSW's makeup artists. And it begins in an interesting fashion, and there's like talk of cleansing agents and how actually soap and water, well, by the standards of the 80s, actually had harsher chemicals, and some people might be allergic to certain things, and how boys need to take care of their skin as well, because they get spots more easier. And then it gets to the makeup bit, and it just feels a bit odd. In a way, and obviously it's not like any kind of top of the pop situation. It's nothing like that, but it just feels odd, just simply of it happening.
Yeah, just faintly mini pops.
Yeah, it's just enough of that sort of feel to make you sort of be uncomfortable.
Yeah, nowhere near as bad.
No,
they're not jigging around in whatever and singing Sheena Easton.
Yeah.
It's all done. It's all done fairly professionally. It just feels wrong in and of itself.
Yeah, it's one of those things that just seems fine in 1986, and now it's just, for various reasons, some quite well known, and it's just But
they wouldn't let you do it.
Yeah, one interesting thing, and I don't know whether this was a problem with my download or whether it was a fault in the Facebook edit they made of it, or the maybe it was even in the original broadcast. At about 17 minutes, halfway through this segment, something really weird happens with the sound, and it's a bit like a different take of the same item, maybe a rehearsal run through, because it's similar words are being spoken, but it's slightly different. Slightly, and it's
like she sprouted a second head, and it's giving its own bits of advice.
Yeah, and it lasts only about 30 seconds, but it's really bewildering, and I'm guessing that must have... I don't know why it would happen, but I suppose it is part of that... Maybe it was part of the broadcast program for whatever reason, and it sounds, like I said, it sounds like a rehearsal run-through that's for some reason being accidentally overdubbed. Probably points to it being pre-recorded, so that would have been a mistake they didn't spot. Because, it was all linear editing at that point, so obviously someone pressed the wrong button, realised, and quickly pressed off.
Yeah. And this is TSW, and I think their editing machine was powered by Steam. So
it does remind me of that joke they have on Red Letter Media about that occurs sometimes when somebody is editing in real time. They say when some really badly edited film comes on, like they sort of mime somebody like at a kind of Metropolis kind of interface, like pulling levers and the giant clock and everything like that.
Yeah, I think that's what TSW's backroom basically looked like.
Yeah. Anyway, we hand back over to Ian, and he makes this kind of non-joke about having I'll have a bit of yellow or blue makeup for myself. And it's like, okay. And then we're into the video review section, aka pop predictions. And I found this absolutely amazing because, this kind of thing wouldn't happen now, and that's a genuine shame because it's just people giving what appear to be really honest and unmediated and very critical opinions about popular music singles.
Yeah,
it's the first video is cut from this version because of the nature of the edit. I think Ian talked over the start of the actual footage, so we don't get to hear.
Yeah, so it's a bit clumsy.
Yeah, so we don't get to hear and they don't back announce it either. So I tried to listen to the tiny fragment of the fade out we do here, but I couldn't make out what it was. But whatever it was, they were hoping to get the video 3 weeks previously. So that was like at the beginning of January. And it's been a hit, apparently. And Ian says that Carrie wasn't impressed initially and put it down to being one of those reissue jobs. And it's interesting because in the 80s, old stuff being reissued was still quite a new thing. And for some people, like, people are so obsessed with stuff being new and modern that they did sometimes criticize the very thing, just the very act sometimes of being just reissuing old records. You know, even though there was a happy audience ready to buy it, where people sort of they sort of took it's like just like that K-Tel stuff, 20 golden hits of the 50s or something like that. But you know, it was like the original album-based context was being brought back on CD.
The very best of whatever we could license.
Yeah, exactly. And that was how you got it through the 70s. But from what I've read up about it in the 80s, it changed. And
obviously CDs had just come in to give everyone an excuse.
Yeah, exactly. So Carrie admits that she was wrong, and she's pleased for the band, whoever they were. And the fun thing about the next video is that they refer to it as being by Duran Duran, but it's actually Arcadia, which is basically the majority of Duran Duran calling themselves a Duran Duran side project. There's like Simon Le Bon, I can't remember the other two, but they're both like the other two main members of the band.
Probably called Taylor. Everyone except Simon
Roger Taylor and Nick thingy. Yeah, but Arcadia and
Rhodes.
Yeah, Nick Rhodes. And they'd originally come out with a single the previous winter called Election Day. And this one, again, we don't get to hear the actual title of the song, but I'm deducing it's Goodbye is Forever, as the dates for the single release seem to just about match up. So I think it came out in January and this is February.
Well done for that, because I didn't know about Arcadia, and I was looking it up and I couldn't find a Duran Duran single that fit the time frame. So
yeah,
I didn't know what they were talking about.
I just vaguely remember hearing about Arcadia somewhere, just seeing it, and then that just popped back into my mind, and I was able to find it. Yeah, but they introduced the video, which of course we don't see. Because of Ian says it's one of the worst videos he's ever seen, and Carrie agrees by pulling this ooh sort of a face. And I did actually watch that video afterwards, and it's just a standard daft 80s music video with lots of sort of surrealistic touches and symbolism that doesn't really add up to anything. But there's been way worse since. It's not like All Around the World by Oasis, with Noel Gallagher getting furious 5 years later over a man with sausage legs. I love that whole compilation YouTube video they put out with like Noel Gallagher just acting with dismay at every single video, but
as if someone else had made it somehow.
Yeah.
I wanted to look up this video after hearing what they said about it, but obviously I didn't know about Arcadia and I couldn't figure out what it was. The only thing I could think was, surely it couldn't have been worse than Wild Boys.
I mean, it's just it's a lot more normal than Wild Boys. It's just sort of it. Basically, the plot is that you've got Simon Le Bon and Nick. I've already forgotten it. Rhodes. You've got Simon Le Bon and Nick Rhodes sort of in these funfair chairs, and they're just dressed normally. Like they're in suits. Nick Rhodes is still in full makeup, but Simon Le Bon has sort of machoed up a little bit. He's got like short hair and like no makeup on, and they're like being taken through some sort of faintly absurd ride, and it's just, like I say, it's just a faintly daft 80s music video, and there's nothing really objectionable about it as such. There's just a bit where there's lots of ladies sort of in frozen poses and all draped in white sheets, and there's they just drop at one point. They're like sitting in, I think they're sitting in chairs that are like also steel hands, and they drop them, then they go flying through the sky, and then they land in some more chairs. It's just a bit sort of, then this happens and then that happens and that happens and that happens, so like,
yeah,
it's nothing really
like 80s music videos tended to be if they had that kind of budget.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a lot of money thrown at just first idea that pops into your head. But like I say, it's not the worst video I've ever seen.
I think in Carrie's case, it's a sort of cumulative weariness, because by now it's 1986.
Yes.
Even Land of Confusion by Genesis has been and gone by now, I think.
Yeah, because I did start to think about that actually, because she does mention that she doesn't like them being. She thinks it's laughable. I think her word was for them to be a controversial attempt to be a controversial group, and that Duran Duran are a pop band. She says. And it's so she obviously they're of course reacting to it, having lived through this in real time. Of course, we're like looking from it from our perspective, and it's a bit odd because that criticism applies. I would imagine apply more to election day, but to this it's just a load of stuff, and the lyrics aren't political in any way I could see really. Oh yeah, I also, as part of this, actually, I remembered seeing a YouTube, I actually looked it up again, a YouTube upload of a BBC music discussion show called 8 Days a Week, where they're also discussing like recent releases, and they're in that show that's on YouTube, they're also discussing reissues, like the ones that presumably were featured as the first video in freeze frame. And the guests on this edition are absolutely amazing. It's George Michael, Morrissey and Tony Blackburn. I mean, that is a hell of a lineup. And also they're talking in the same kind of, casual and critical, well, in Morrissey's case, it's sort of, he's very coy about why he doesn't like some music by black people. Let's just put it that way,
Yeah.
And, but like George and Tony Blackburn are like they properly engage, and they're critical where they think it's fair. They really praise this old doo-wop group from the 50s, but they complain that aside from the singles, they didn't have the best material, so their voices were wasted. It's just like interesting like criticisms like that. But in freeze frame, about a year or so after that, whenever it was, Ian moves the conversation away from Duran Duran and Arcadia by saying, "Anyway, we mustn't bitch," and it was quite startling to hear that word.
It was
on a kids show. There was there's like a CITV like episode of Dramarama where two girls, I've seen a clip of it, where two girls sing a song with the line "We don't want none of that crap," which I don't know how that got in an episode of Dramarama either, but there seemed to be something was in the air around that time regarding mild swear words.
The kids, because they're sitting in the middle of all the kids, and they don't react at all.
No, and
they don't seem to notice.
Yeah, and a lot of them are more busy playing around with bits of party streamers. It was only at this point where I noticed there were party streamer stuff all them. Like they keep readjusting them and putting around them their heads and everything.
Because they've been sitting there for 40 minutes or maybe 2 hours now.
Oh, yeah.
This is the point where they're starting to get bored.
Yeah. And so now they've got like a competition before the third video. They're picking up results from a crown for some reason. There's some joking about you have to give it back to Diana or the Queen Mum will be cross. And it's referencing something, I think, but I don't know what.
Lost to time.
Yeah. And the results it's odd actually, because the results have already been drawn and they're just taking the two already selected winners from it. So it's, I don't know why they're indulging in that.
So it's like a lot of the things about this program and TSW in general. It's like they've got this, they know this trope, and they sort of faintly, and they're going to try and do it themselves, but they don't really comprehend it properly. Sort of faintly uncomprehending, like the 4 questions in the competition.
Yes, that too, and like asking like presumably the RNLI people to set the question and like not have it run by them again. Because I actually going back to that just very briefly, I really remember when Carrie was reading out the setup for that question, she's like trying to remember it all, and she has to look at one of the RNL guys to like make sure she's read it out properly, like expecting them to say, "Oh, you actually missed out one thing" or something. So yeah. So the third video after that is Alicia with Baby Talk. We don't get to see it, of course. I looked it up, and it was a hit the previous December in America for 1 week. It topped the Billboard Hot Dance chart because they have like multiple charts over there.
Yeah.
And according to Wikipedia, it had been released in the UK in 1984, and for some reason they're like giving her a second push because she's like a clone of Madonna, apparently.
According to Ian.
Yes, and Carrie really does not like this. I actually made a point of writing this all down because I wanted to recite it as accurately as possible. So Carrie says that Alicia is a, quote, brunette Madonna, but a bad version. Oh, just vile, terrible. The song was bad. The video was bad. I hated it. And Ian is very amused at this. It's probably the only time where he really properly connects on any kind of genuine level with Carrie. To hear somebody have a go at some bad music he dislikes. I mean, I didn't actually get around to hearing Baby Talk at all, so I can't say either way what was it like. And Ian does mention there's probably a market for Madonna clones, which seems to be what a lot of people were thinking at the time, but it definitely didn't pan out that way.
No, there was a lot of attempts. Sunita, Tiffany, Fiona, various other women without surnames.
Yeah. Tiffany sort of became like a mini phenomenon in her own right, along with Debbie Gibson.
Yeah.
And 88, 89.
Yeah.
Everything. But, yeah.
Nowhere near.
No.
Nowhere near what they were.
No.
Nowhere near Madonna.
So we finally get to the mystery guest person. And it's Adrian Boot, a legendary music photographer. I believe he's still around today. And he's taken pictures of loads of rock stars. He took pictures of Bob Marley while he was in Jamaica during the 70s. Yeah. He was the main photographer of Live Aid, which is why he's on here. And he has like a book compiling various photos. And it turns out that he's been taking photographs all throughout the thing of all the different segments. And it's quite amusing when he does show them because during the makeup one, you have that girl sitting and smiling, and in the background, like Carrie looks sort of absurdly depressed, and they actually point that out. I don't know. I don't know what that was about really, but and they've also taken pictures of like John Miller looking very serious, sort of looking. I'm having my picture taken and sort of like that. He taking it through like Ian's. This was interesting for me actually as an adult. And again, I don't know if it would have been as interesting to kids, maybe because there's some mention of music, popular stars, and I guess some rock stars. So he shows off this camera, and it's like Ian says, well, we're going back to the old 1920s Victorian thing, and he explains that it's like it is like a modern camera, but it takes like massive pieces of film, and he's used a Polaroid film to like take it because it doesn't need a light. And it's actually quite interesting because he basically describes some basic things about photography while he does so, because he mentions like during the first band performance, they lowered down the light, so he had to raise the exposure, but that resulted in it becoming blurry, and he explains why and stuff like that.
Not necessarily the most compelling thing for 6-year-olds.
No, I mean, it was interesting for me, obviously, but as I keep saying, it's like, This is kind of like the running theme, not just through Freeze Frame, but through a lot of Saturday morning kids shows that aren't the really big, well-known ones, and even ones that are made by major TV companies. There's just this odd thing that happens sometimes in some productions where somebody is like gripped with the need to put in just stuff that young kids aren't going to be interested in, and they tend to think, well, it's less out of a thing of this will improve you, more out of who can we get to fill in this, this 6-minute bit on this thing.
Is this potentially of vague interest to anyone under the age of 10?
Yeah, and there's mention of people at concerts in 1985, 86, trying to take pictures, he says. He keeps seeing it, trying to take pictures of the band from miles away with their Instamatic cameras. It reminded me in a weird way of like now, only that people are like using phones to take whole videos, and they can zoom in and all that.
The future.
Yeah, but I'll try and wrap this up because I've been talking about Freeze Frame for about maybe over an hour now. I've got
I've got an hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah. So the last band in the studio is Latin Quarter. Well, I have heard of them, but I've never actually heard their music, and I don't actually get to, because every bit of their music is obviously has to be snipped out.
Cut out.
And we get a very sudden end to the video.
It's their one song, Radio Africa.
Right.
By the way.
Right. Okay.
For the benefit of the listeners.
And we just get this tiny fragment that's been snipped out just before the credits of like Ian's sort of saying goodbye, and like he carries with him and the kids, and the main bloke from Latin Quarters is just standing there with his guitar. Then they just mix it straight to the TSW logo, and that's it for the Facebook version. And it actually is a bit of a shame, because it reminded me that this is being, of course, edited for a slightly more general audience than us people who are obsessed about archive television, of course. So, normal people don't have interesting credits or ad break points or things like that. So
normal people don't know what brake bumpers are.
Yeah, and it's also made it a bit doubly difficult, because if we had the credits, I could have looked up the whoever that first band was in the first video, and you might have been able to work out the Arcadia thing as well.
Yeah,
but. So that's it for Freeze Frame in 1986, and it was fascinating watching it. It was weird, because the first bit was a real slog with all the RNLI stuff, but there was something very, at the end of it, very charming, despite Ian's best attempts at being the most sullen man in the studio. And I did like it, actually. I don't know whether I would actually have watched it constantly all the time. It's nice to see as an archive thing.
I didn't. I would have been watching Dungeons and Dragons over on the other side.
I mean, I probably was at the same time too in London, and So that wraps that up for Freeze Frame. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is my bit of obscure media that I sent to Matthew, and it's I just realised I don't precisely know how to say this, even though it's like a really famous phrase that's used in like drama and stuff all the time.
Well, I was going to bring that up, actually, because it should be pronounced Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah.
But the game itself mispronounces it consistently as Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah.
So that's the pronunciation I'm going to use.
Okay, we'll use that. Deus Ex Machina. And so this is something that you had heard of before, of course. When did you first hear of it?
I think it was brought up in an issue of PC Zone back in the late 90s when retro gaming first became a thing, because now there was enough of a past to look back at.
Yeah, Charlie Brooker wrote for PC Zone, didn't he?
Yeah, I think it was him who brought it up. Surreal allegorical storytelling, he called it.
Yeah, and it was basically the main guy behind it was a person called Mel Croucher, who was a very, very early British games designer before the games industry existed, and
he's credited with having the first British games company, apparently.
Yeah, because his company was called Automata Cartography, which is like a combined as it was like did stuff with like a multimedia company to begin with. He did like maps, and they did a thing for the Southampton where they it was like a cassette based guide thing with voices and actors.
Yeah, and he is also a musician.
Yes,
which comes up in this game.
Yes, in fact, they in more recent years there was an LP released by an American label on vinyl, a collection of all the B-sides of various games where he did the music and combined music and comedy sketches, and he formed that in '77, and some of their first proper stuff was for Sinclair ZX81. And it was a thing called Can of Worms.
Precursor to the Spectrum.
Yes, the precursor to this. Well, it's actually the sequel in itself. It was the sequel computed to the ZX80, and the ZX80 was actually a sequel to something else put out by Sinclair Research when it was still known as Sinclair Radionics, and it begins with an M, and I can't remember what it was, and you could only get it as a kit. Anyway.
Your marmalade sandwich.
Yes. Yeah, you have this. So he was quite a very unusual designer, well, just in
Still
general.
is, still alive.
And he is still around. He's done like an updated version of this game, I believe, and it has Christopher Lee.
Yeah.
But anyway, there was this. Yeah, he did things like a Pie Mania, where it's just this hideous sort of purple thing with a long nose that sort of
kind of like what Mr. Chad might look like behind the wall.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like
Pie Man.
The Pie Man, yeah, and he was portrayed by the main programmer at like trade events and wearing like this grotesque costume, sort of like had the same kind of look to it as like really bad off-brand versions of like a Pikachu costume or a Sonic costume. You know how like cloth and like all horrible and wrinkly like that. I mean, it was like an official thing worn by one of the programmers.
Or an inbred nosy bonk.
Yeah. that is, yeah.
Yeah, he was their mascot for a bit.
Yeah, he was their mascot. Yeah, and
he showed up in advertising for the game immediately preceding the one you sent me. My name's Uncle Groucho. You win a fat cigar.
Yes, and that like another like the Pie Mania, which was the main one. Was just that was something based around an actual real life competition. There's quite a story about how eventually the prize in that was won by two women who like studied it for like 3 years, and they eventually got it in 1985 or something.
The Groucho competition didn't take quite so long to solve, but it was solved. It just meant he just bought tickets to Disneyland, basically.
Yeah. One thing I remember actually about Mel Crouch is that for a while in the late 80s, he had a ring-up comedy phone line around about the time where phone lines in general providing any kind of service were like a big thing. So, you know, you had like dial an insult, and obviously there were the sex chat lines, but there was like things like
the sex chat lines were the only ones to really survive any extended length of time.
That is true, yeah. Like I still remember like 0891 50 50 50 as David Williams did it in that Mash and Peas sketch, which is basically his peak really as a comedian. But
a competition and a phone-in competition is pretty much the only thing that Deus Ex Machina doesn't have.
Yes, yeah. So it's basically he actually explicitly said, I wanted to make this an interactive movie, and obviously because it's like on the spectrum, he had to do really simplistic but sort of creepy graphics and have the soundtrack as an actual tape thing, and it's split into two parts because he was able to fit both parts of the game if you loaded them separately in order. And the cast list for what's the pronunciation they use again?
Deus Ex Machina.
Deus Ex Machina. Yeah, it's
quite an amazing cast list.
It is.
I'd like to know how he assembled it, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's John Pertwee. You have Frankie Howard doing a couple of things. There's Ian Jury, and the other parts are mainly done by a female singer whose name I forget. I think she was somebody he knew, and it's I forget.
She's done some session work in other stuff apparently.
Yeah, and
I've also forgotten her name.
Yeah,
and Mel Croucher himself.
Yes.
And, Professor E.B. Thompson.
There was this. I lost my thread now. Sorry.
Donna Bailey.
Oh right, yes, that's it. Yeah, that's her name now. Yeah.
She's the only one without a Wikipedia page.
Ah,
it's a shame.
Yeah, so this is basically it's like a dystopian audio play with an accompanying ZX Spectrum game in two parts.
Yeah.
And I mean, why don't we? Because you mentioned before you had tried to play it before, and that you were.
I did try to play it before. I thought it was quite an interesting idea. I could never quite get it synchronized properly.
Yes, that is like a common.
I tried again for this. You sent it to me as a video, which was obviously eminently sensible. But I wanted to actually play through it as well, and I did manage to do that in the end with the Spectrum emulator, playing the video at the same time. occasionally going back to the video to see if I was anywhere near the right place, and I usually was. You can actually get it on Steam right now.
Oh yes, that is
remastered.
That is true.
I could not get that working on Linux, on Windows, on anything.
Really? What's that's the Windows version, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's on Steam, marked for all 3 of the major operating systems. I run Linux generally, but I couldn't get it to work on Linux. Couldn't get it to work on Wine, the emulator for Linux, and that's really annoying because presumably this one actually has synchronized sound.
Yeah, and I think there is actually proper.
So I'm not constantly pausing and faffing around.
Yeah, and I think there is actually proper like interactivity, because obviously you can do that now, and like you get different lines throughout the play. I think I would imagine that was what they would have done, and I've seen like 3D graphics and stuff.
Yeah, the other thing, it wasn't very easy to play because the Spectrum emulators have really weird keyboard layouts.
Yes, that's always.
It's a lot of guesswork trying to figure out what button did which before you even trying to figure out what the gameplay itself was.
Yeah, some emulators do have that like a little help screen that tries to show you roughly which key is mapped to which, and it's doubly even with that through. I find that you have, because there's the hellish thing where like one key press isn't enough. You have to like press one key once and press another key, and then you get load appears on the screen or something. Even at the time, like people in computer magazines were saying this is absolutely ridiculous, because people noted that it took longer to type something out using this supposedly 1 button or 2 button system than it would have been to type it out. There was actually
Clive Sinclair's a very clever man, but user-friendliness was never his strength.
No. I remember that Sir Clive Sinclair once tried to... He did see the thing about like portable computing, to his credit. He did foresee a time where some devices along the lines of something like smartphones and tablets. But of course, he tried to implement it in like 1985, and it never got beyond like a any kind of prototype stage, or even like I think it just reached a blueprint stage. And there's like it was revealed recently in a bunch of old scans of Sinclair research material, and it had something about like they're having trouble with the display because the standard like small CRT thing, which was another thing he was obsessed with, small TVs, they couldn't fit that into the portable thing itself. So he tried to come up with some sort of absurd thing that worked a bit like how the Nintendo Virtual Boy did, only like it projected it onto a nearby surface. It was like scanning mirrors, and it was like only in yellow light or something, and it was just absolutely insane. And you can see basically why he had to sell his company to Alan Sugar. Yeah, so this is Mel Crouch's. It is his magnum opus, basically, after everything that came before.
Yeah.
And why don't you sort of run through the plot or something? And
I'm not sure plot is the word. I actually don't want to go into too much detail because I want people to actually play it for themselves and have the experience for themselves, because there is literally nothing else like it.
Yeah.
With the possible exception of Deus Ex Machina 2, which I will mention later.
Yeah, it's like it has that real feeling of like a TV, like a cult TV show from the 70s that's really dystopian. I mean, obviously because it's got, John Pertwee in it, obviously, and there's, you happen to have Frankie Howard in it, and it's just, and it just feels like a proper, like, again, hauntological. It's got that 70s stroke 80s feel to the whole thing, with all that ominous talk from John Pertwee at the beginning about like the nerve gas killing the last mouse on Earth, and you grow out from like a poo, basically. Yeah,
it's not really expanded upon the nerve gas killing the last mouse and why it's the last mouse and why there's nerve gas. You have to make a lot of inferences, and another angle that I think I might have more experience of than you is that it's a prog concept album that you play.
Yeah, because I'm not that familiar with prog. I vaguely know the tropes, and I've not really listened.
I mean, I'm a fan of Pink Floyd. I've listened to Van de Graaff Generator in my time.
Yeah, one of Johnny Rotten's favourite bands, funny enough.
Yeah. And Hawkwind. He also loves Hawkwind.
Yeah, I didn't know that actually. That sort of makes sense.
He called Silver Machine the beginning of rave. So yeah, I wouldn't consider myself a massive prog fan. I can't be doing with Yes and the twiddly stuff that's twiddly for the sake of being twiddly. And Deus Ex Machina, in places, reminded me of the sort of things that Roger Waters of Pink Floyd was doing, or thought he was doing, around that time. If Mel Croucher's not doing a deliberate Roger Waters impression with his vocals, then that's one hell of a coincidence. It does sound uncannily similar.
The only Pink Floyd album I think I've ever really heard all the way through, more than multiple times actually, because my dad kept playing it over and over again in the car when we would be going to Sainsbury's, is The Wall. And we'd just be driving just anywhere, like to Sutton, to going to shopping in Sutton, London Borough of Sutton.
You drove to Sutton?
And you'd have like the urge fills me with the urge to defecate, or whatever it is at the very end thing.
The trial.
Yeah. We'd be driving like down to Kingston upon Thames, and like we would hear that like 3 times in the same journey or something. Once we picked up like one of my friends, and we because we were all going like as a family, including my friend to, I think it was the cinema or somewhere, and he got to hear that over and over again on our drive, and he was like really weirded out by it. Yeah, sorry. Anyway, continue.
This is explaining a lot. So yeah, Deus Ex Machina starts by introducing the cast, actually, with little digitised images of Ian Dury, John Pertwee, Frankie Howard, Donna Bailey and Mel Croucher, which I thought was quite nice.
Yes. And also in the advert on the cover it says also starring yourself.
Also starring yourself, yeah.
Yeah.
Yourself as the player.
Yeah.
According to the manual. Ian Dury apparently plays the fertilizer. Donna Bailey is the machine. E.P. Thompson is the voice of reason.
Right.
In the justice segment. And John Pertwee is the storyteller. Yeah. And Frankie Howard is the defect police.
Yes, it's
so really... that right there might give you an idea of what kind of thing we're dealing with.
I mean, yes, it is quite clear when it's all like laid out. It's really weird to hear Frankie Howard like doing his usual sort of thing, and he's like talking about being the defect police. It's like, it's like some sort of nightmarish version of like a Carry On film or something.
I was so impressed with Frankie Howard actually.
Yeah, I mean it is really good, but it's just it's a very grim tale, even though it doesn't make a lot of sense, obviously, as you mentioned. But I do...
As a story, I'm not entirely certain it actually has a through line. As a story, I'm not sure it has a story.
Yes.
It's mostly pure allegory.
Yeah, it's mentioned something about Shakespeare, I think. Seven Ages of Man.
Yeah. The Shakespeare's Seven Ages of Man is kind of the motif. Mel Croucher's written this cyberpunk version of it with the mentioned software and plugs and things. And John Pertwee reads it out in its entirety at the start and then goes back to it to introduce each segment. All the screen to stage and so on.
It feels a bit odd when you're listening to the soundtrack, how you have that, you've already heard it and then you keep getting bits of it repeated again.
Yeah, it makes more sense actually while you're playing through. I should clarify that this game uniquely is played by you put the cassette in the Spectrum, because this is when video games came on cassettes, and then there was another cassette that you had to play on an actual tape player. You had to play at the same time, with little instructions at the start of each side so you can synchronize it properly. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense.
Yes, it actually contributed apparently to the game flopping. I mean, obviously, aside from the fact it was just so strange for the time, And
It made the game a little bit more expensive for a start.
yeah, it cost something like £15, which at the time, generally, most games, the full price was something like £5.99, I believe.
Yeah.
So it was,
Up to about £8.
Yeah, that's more like it. And there was, and apparently I did a little bit of looking at this series of articles that Mel Croucher wrote a few years ago when he was talking about this, looking back on it. And he mentioned how when the game was pirated, the pirates just copied the game cassette and forgot about the actual music. So there were loads of kids who played it, and they got a bad impression of it because they're just seeing all these abstract things everywhere, and they didn't understand what to do, even more than usual.
It's not massively clear with the soundtrack.
Well, yes.
There's a sort of Harlan Ellison, I have no mouth and I must scream sort of thing going on, in that you're born inside a machine, played by Donna Bailey. It's your mother.
Yeah.
Apparently you're born out of a mouse dying of nerve gas after crawling into the machine and taking a shit.
Yes.
The actual implications are largely sort of glossed over. There isn't an awful lot of gameplay, but there's more than you might expect.
Yes, there's like little mini games, and of course you don't ever you can't get a game over sequence, of course, but it affects a percentage.
Because it's a concept album and it's trying to tell this story. You're kind of freed from any particular anxiety over the gameplay itself, which is just as well, because I was crap at it.
Yeah, it's very much of the kind of thing
you always know that it's going to have to move on to the next section, no matter how badly you do.
Yeah, and you just get like a percentage. And that's nice. I actually like the digitized font they have for that percentage, with the sort of nice sort of.
It was quite sort of 3D effect.
Yeah, it had a faint sort of art deco look to it for some reason. I don't know why I think that, but yeah.
Okay, the first bit is conception, and you have to guide this. There's no clear explanation of what you're supposed to be doing, but eventually you figure out there's these double helixes spinning around, and you have to guide this little square around, hitting all of the double helixes and making them spin faster, while avoiding another square that, if it touches you, you die. Or the square disappears and you have to start again. And that goes on for a bit whilst the machine is singing a song about being a machine, basically. After that, Ian Jury shows up and the screen fills up with these little wiggly sperms, and he starts singing about how great it is to be a wiggly sperm.
Yes.
And you have to guide your little square towards the egg. And I actually couldn't do that, so it's lucky the game existed at all, because I never actually managed to guide the little sperm into the little egg. I was spending half an hour trying to figure out what button did which. After that, you're a fetus.
Oh yes.
Zooming through the womb-like tunnel, while Mel Croucher himself sings an extremely Roger Waters-ish song about being born, in an abstract allegorical sort of way. You've got to guide the fetus through the tunnel, avoiding bumpy bits, and the percentage stays on the screen the whole time, and it goes down every time you hit a bumpy bit. And the song goes on arguably longer than it should, really, with the extended coda of "What do we want? Love. When do we want it? Now," sung with a class of school children, which just makes it seem even more like another brick in the wall.
Yeah.
And the "What do we want?" chant goes on at least 3 times too long. And in between all of this, there's John Pertwee obliquely explaining what's going on, or not. I mean, some of the lines are just weird and esoteric for the sake of being weird and esoteric, which is fine by me. Side A closes with Frankie Howard saying, "God knows what's going to happen next. I don't." And then, which I really liked. And then side B opens with him saying, "God knows what's going to happen next. Don't I?"
Oh,
which
yes.
is completely meaningless, but cool.
But it sounds like it
It
means something.
It sounds like it means something. It
Yeah.
sounds like it should be cool and profound, even though it isn't. It doesn't mean anything. It's just Mel Croucher being silly.
Yes. Yes. So what comes after that bit?
After the fetus, is the slightly confusing bit with the defect police and you've got this little square and you have to move like a shield, like a little green shield around the borders of the square to see off eyeballs that Frankie Howard apparently is shooting at you.
Yeah, he's like talking, giving this funny sort of creepy, on purpose sort of song about the defects and things.
Yeah.
It's very sort of Roger
About
Waters.
being the defect police, and that goes on for a while.
Yes.
I should clarify, Frankie Howard doesn't actually sing.
Oh yeah.
Rex Harrison's it. Don't worry about that. You don't have to hear Frankie Howard singing.
Yeah, he sort of just sort of talks in rhythm, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which isn't to say he's rapping either. That would be worse.
Oh god, that would have been an absolute disaster. or absolutely amazing. I mean, he could go either way, but yeah.
It would go both ways.
Yeah.
It would be both. And that segues into the lover section, which is basically the same gameplay, only now you're fighting off kissing lips. And the machine is singing to you. Again, mostly meaningless lyrics, but in that same cool way. That one chorus ends with the words, "This is the day that sadness died," and then the final chorus ends with the words, "This is the day that madness cried." Which again means nothing, but sounds
profound somehow.
Profound, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you're treated to the cast flickering back and forth at random on the screen as a way of telling you to turn over the cassettes. And after the lover is the soldier, which is the darkest part of the game, probably. Again, the gameplay is basically just deflecting things with a shield, but it's a bright red background and a dotted line and the silhouette of a man just tramping across the dotted line, whilst Frankie Howard delivers this really bleak song about war and death, and war crimes are easy, it's called.
Yeah.
War crimes are easy. This gun's for hire.
Yeah. Mel Croucher, I think he was in the army from looking up for a while. He was in the army, and those experiences actually turned him like against. It made him into a pacifist of some kind, I believe, because he was very much against any kind of violence in video games, even like Space Invaders kind of grade kind of stuff. He was always very particular about that.
That comes up in this part, in the soldiers' party, and Drury shows up as your sort of conscience, still in the character of Siddy the Sperm, but sort of acting as your conscience. And he has a line about how violent video games are wrong. All killing is wrong, even in video games, he says. And the people who sell them to children should be locked up.
Yes.
Which is a little bit on the nose, but heartfelt.
Yeah. It is something that, obviously I don't like the idea of just banning video games for whatever, because a lot of people try to do that, and they're just generally dreadful people for trying to pull one over on various people. But it's sometimes I do see things on like being streamed on like Twitch or something, and I've never really liked the more modern Mortal Kombat stuff. It just seems kind of stupid and bleak and nasty, and it's not something that's going to make you into some sort of massive serial killer, but it's just sort of pathetic in a way. Yeah.
The march of technology hasn't really been kind to that sort of thing. Doom made more sense. It was better in 1993 when by necessity it was more cartoonish than it is now, and it's realistic.
Yeah.
And it's just over the top and unpleasant.
Yeah, like the same goes for Mortal Kombat, of course, because you have in the original it was just these daft sort of digitized sprites of actual people, and for the limbs like they just cut like the bits of graphics off and make them fly across the screen, and it was a bit goofy and silly.
Yeah, a discarded rib cage is somehow more acceptable as set decoration in 1993 when it's less realistic.
Yeah.
And you can detach yourself from it. It's more Brechtian.
Yeah. Yeah. So the next part of the game is...
Yeah, the soldier bit ends rather confusingly with Mel Croucher as the defect, as the sort of player character, taking control somehow and rearranging the defect policeman, Frankie Howard, into different shapes, and the last we hear of Frankie Howard is something backwards.
Yeah. I've not listened to that bit backwards. So
No, I haven't either.
No, I'll have to do that. Maybe I can reverse it. I'll clip that out, and maybe I can reverse it and play it at the end of this podcast. I wonder if I can do that. Yeah, we could do that.
Depends how interesting it is, I suppose.
Yes, if it's not nothing interesting in particular, I'll put something else in reverse instead.
So after that, it's the Justice.
Yeah.
And the silhouette of the man becomes a big fat blob with saggy tits.
Yes.
And it starts stomping through a ruined sort of cityscape, jumping on... Well, apparently you're supposed to jump over good things and stomp on bad things.
Yeah.
But I could never make it do anything except sort of leap into the air, and I couldn't tell whether what it was doing was good or not or whatever. And the machine returns to sing the song for this section, and she basically takes on the role of a nagging mother, telling you you're a bastard. You're more machine than I am. You're an ass-soul. Which I've found out after the fact. I found a transcript. It's actually ass-soul. It's a pun.
Yeah.
I wish I'd never made you, she says.
Oh. It's
a little bit harsh.
Yeah. It reminds me actually of that Mel Crouch actually had this I was mentioning it earlier about the phone-in line. I just remembered it. But anyway, he had a stand-up, not stand-up, but like a comedy line, as I said earlier. And he would always be advertised in Your Sinclair. I rang it up once. I can't remember much about it, except there's something about a wacky secretary who went mad and started laughing crazily, and then Mel Croucher came along and said something else, and then I can't remember. I may have put the phone down at that point. But and also Your Sinclair were not very kind to that but either advert or line. They said because it was advertised with the words Mel Croucher, the funniest man in Europe, and Your Sinclair said only if the other man in Europe was Sid Little. I mean, I really do like Mel Croucher.
Not even Eddie Large.
Yeah. It's I mean, even. I do like Mel Croucher's stuff. He's not. The humor is I don't know how to describe it really. It's
corn.
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Yeah, it is very corny, and sometimes it's amusing in a way. Like when somebody says that, oh, what if there was bee blood in an Automata game, and he says, well, it's just Automata sauce, and I just like that kind of daft corny.
He likes that pun a lot. His current company's called Automata Sauce.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's true, isn't it? Oh, yeah.
With an O-U-R-C-E.
Yeah. Yeah. It does.
That was the joke that won the Groucho competition. In fact.
Oh.
There's no blood in our games. It's Automata Sauce.
Yes, that's it. Yes, I knew I was mixing stuff up, but yeah.
You had to solve the final puzzle in the game and then write in with a joke.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's the one that won.
Yeah.
So anyway, you're stomping through this ruined cityscape. It gets increasingly ruined the more you stomp, and your mother's nagging you in the background. And alongside her are some snatches from what I think is a lecture delivered by E.P. Thompson, the noted Marxist and pacifist historian and intellectual, who's credited as the voice of reason and thanked for the use of his voice in the manual, in the credits.
Yeah. So they've taken like an already pre-recorded thing, and he's allowed them to.
So it sounds, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like. Which, I like E.P. Thompson, he's a good man. So, well done, Mel Croucher, you have my approval. And
that's the last. This next one's the last bit, is it?
The next one's the last one. The next one is old age.
Yeah.
Second childishness. And the silhouette of the man becomes bent over and carrying a stick and limping about on the spot. And a big, well, I thought at first was a mountain range, but it's actually like a heart monitor.
Oh yes.
Scrolls by on the bottom of the screen, and you have to there's two tiny dots, and you have to make sure the two tiny dots are always in between the line.
Yeah.
Moving it up and down, like one of those electronic fairground games with the metal wire.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yes, the one they the same thing that they've made actual later on video games on. Like there's a thing for the PlayStation 1, I think it's called Irritating Stick. I don't know if you've heard of that.
That's a good name for it. That is a good name.
Yeah, it's a Japanese made game, and for the Western release they named it Irritating Stick because it's actually based on a
pretty much sums it up.
Yeah, it's based on a section of a video, not a video, on a quiz show where they had to do that, but it's like really long.
This bit of Deus Ex Machina is also really long. All of the segments are longer than they should be, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 40 minutes, 40 to 45 minutes length of a standard album. Fortunately, it's not a double concept album. It's not The Wall, it's just a final cut.
Yeah.
Pink Floyd humour.
Yes.
And that's occasionally interrupted with a game where you have to break up little blobs of colour that are meant to be either red blood cells or white blood cells or something else that I can't remember right now.
It might be like cholesterol in the heart, fatty deposits or something.
Yeah, it could be something like that.
Yeah.
It's all to do with how your body's failing and you're old and you're dying and you're old and you're old and you're dying and you're old. And Mel Croucher sings this very slow blues song over the top of it. John Pertwee's reading out the last few bits of the Shakespeare until it all sort of fades out and you're reduced back to Sidney the Sperm and Ian Drury shows up one last time to have a final conversation with the machine. So he's sort of like the father and or yourself having a final conversation at the end of life. The machine in this last bit is given a vocoder effect that makes it almost impossible to understand what she's saying.
Yes.
It's a bit unfortunate. And it gives you a little score of how well you did. The big percentage, by the time I finished, was at 0. So it goes down with every thing you do wrong in the game, and my one reached 0 about 2 minutes before the blues song ended. So, but it gives you a tabulated percentage for every segment as well. So to maintain the illusion that it's a game.
Yeah, there's a bit at the end with Ian Drury at the very end where he sort of sings it's like a little jingly sort of.
He has a reprise of his little sperm song from earlier.
Yeah, that's it. And it's he sort of laughs, goes ha 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 or something. That's the very last thing.
Ha 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 ha, and then it stops. Yeah, we're not really doing it justice with the description.
No.
The actual experience of playing it is.
Yeah, I've seen like YouTube comments and like people have been actively disturbed by it. Like in a way.
Well, there are parts that are quite genuinely, at the very least, unsettling.
Yes.
Frankie Howard chanting "War crimes are easy" over and over again as a mantra.
Yes.
Is quite genuinely quite creepy.
Yeah,
Quite a creepy thing.
And there's something actually that I appreciate it, because it's like horrific and scary in like a way that something like, I don't know, Silent Hill isn't, like, it's so obviously you have the thing, the spooky family and the zombies and all, people getting but this is like it has.
There's nothing wrong with that kind of horror.
But
this is more my kind of horror, to be honest.
Yeah, it's more my kind of horror as well, and it's just sort of. It is amusing how, like, in one level, like, people would look at the graphics and sort of laugh at them, but then they would hear, the song and be. I mean, I've seen people like they seem to be like personally offended by the whole thing. Like in some of the YouTube comments, they're like, it's like, oh, this is some madman's attempt at a prog rock album or whatever they was. They said stuff like that, and it's.
Well, it is.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a pretty decent attempt.
It is a good, but it's just like
the music genuinely isn't bad. I mean, there are a lot worse prog rock albums out there than Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah, and it's I think they've actually released both the original recording and the redone recording with Christopher Lee on, I think, through various stores. It was on Amazon. It's probably on Spotify and some other places. Yeah. It's just. People always go on about, like, the standard sort of horror games, and like that one where you're like it's a pizza place, and like you're sort of ducking and diving, and it doesn't make sense. But then
Five Nights at Freddy's.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, but then you confront it with something like this, and it really does genuinely unnerve. Whereas the other one is just boo jump scare.
The thing about that sequel that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Or. It's really a remake, but it's called Deus Ex Machina 2.
Yes.
It doesn't have as impressive a cast.
Yeah.
It's got Christopher Lee. It's Christopher Lee instead of John Pertwee. And it's got Ian Drury back from Beyond the Grave. And they've got the Portuguese-American character actor Joaquim de Almeida as well in the Frankie Howard role. But never mind the cast. The thing about it is, it is reimagined. It's got proper 3D graphics that look more like what they're supposed to look like. They're less abstract. I haven't played it. I've only seen screenshots and things, but I think it's less effective with the more realistic graphics. It's very, very abstract indeed in the original version, partly through necessity because this is the ZX Spectrum. A lot of it is just colours and shapes. Deus Ex Machina 2 seems to be making an effort to look like what it's supposed to look like, and I don't think that serves the art, if you like, as well as just pure abstraction, deliberate or forced.
It's like limitations sometimes, well, quite often, create things that are better than the original vision would have actually been. When people go back and like remaster it, like the obvious thing is Star Wars, it just loses everything. They lose sight of what was actually good about it. That was created out of these conditions when not everything was ideal.
Limitations quite often are the mother of invention, and that's why a game like Deus Ex Machina could even exist in 1984, because the landscape was so small and the technology so limited that it paradoxically sort of freed the imagination to do any old sort of allegorical. Deus Ex Machina is it's far from the only sort of attempt at allegorical storytelling. It's the only one that tried it in this particular way.
Yeah. But
there were plenty of mostly text adventures like A Mind Forever Voyaging.
Yes, I've heard of that one. I've not played it.
I had a whole list in my head and I've forgotten.
You see, that's why I take notes.
That's why you take notes.
This is like I've seen this described in various places as the first art game, because obviously you're now on itch.io or however you pronounce
Yeah.
that. It's like you have a lot of these things.
I would pronounce it Itch.io.
Sometimes I've been wondering whether that's the correct pronunciation myself, but yeah, you get lots of these little indie games and about all sorts of things, and people do like really sneer at that sort of stuff. Like when they did that recent, justice for the racial equality bundle, of course, which raised like $8 million. There were lots of people saying, "Well, I'll buy it because I support this thing, but there's probably be hardly any good games and stuff in there." And it's like the whole thing is just fascinating. That even like the the experiments and the weird stuff and the stuff that like barely exists or will exist in some weird liminal sort of form, like it might be a text file and an MP3 that you plays a game with. It's just, that's what I like the most, actually, more than like normal games. It's just these odd things that don't properly fit anywhere. And actually I extend that really to just media in general, like films, TV shows, just odd things that are so much more interesting so often than what you actually is like presented to you on a platter as like this is the best thing ever.
At the moment, there's The Last of Us Part 2, which is trying to sort of bring art into the mainstream, and everybody's having a go at it for that.
Yeah, and I've seen like criticism of. You remember that? I think this called not Gone Home, or is it Gone Home? I can't remember.
Yes, it is Gone Home.
Yeah, that's it. And it was it's a thing where you just walk around and you like look at stuff and you read stuff and you discover a story like that. Now I've never played it, but it sounds really interesting.
I haven't played it either, but I feel like I should.
Yeah, and it just sounds interesting to me, and I like the fact that it exists. But it has had so much shit thrown at it from all sorts of people, even people I thought that would like it. Like there's that bloke, Your Movie Sucks, that guy, and he sometimes he has this other channel where he does video games, and it's like his video game taste is like the absolute opposite taste of his cinema stuff.
Yeah,
and it's like he really had like he uploaded this stupid video where he kind of accidentally did a speed run of Gone Home, and it doesn't have like a proper thing to stop it because he just bundles straight through to the thing, and then he really disingenuously sort of does this like montage of like game of the year, so much content for such a little price, and it's like you ran past the content. It's just infuriating, and yeah.
I know what I was going to say now. ID.
Oh yes,
it's another one. Mel Croucher's follow-up to this.
Yeah,
which is a text adventure.
Yeah,
where you're talking to some kind of ghost thing that takes over inanimate objects.
Yeah, I think it's like an alien life form, and it takes form. It goes in your computer, and you have to like talk to it and convince it of things. Or something.
You have to gain its trust, so it doesn't.
Yeah. And it's I like the fact that now you have these odd little experiments everywhere, and it's just a shame that
now we have now the cottage industries, the bedroom programmers are back.
Yeah, exactly, and I like that, and it's because the situation like about 15-20 years ago it was just like Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, and that was it. And like you did have indie things in a way, but they were like horrible little flash games on Newgrounds that were just rubbish, And like there's now sort of there's a sense of poise. There's a real attempt to do good things, in both an artistic sense. Whereas like 15 or so years ago, you just had like. Drop a big cannon on George W. Bush or something, something stupid like that.
Frogs in blenders.
Yeah, Joe Cartoon was the thing. Yeah. So, do you have any summing up things? Any other things you can?
Like I say, it's not particularly clear what the story actually is. It's not even particularly clear what point Mel Croucher was trying to make, apart from the one that's just flatly stated about violence being bad.
Yeah, I think he mentions in one of these articles that it's his attempt to sort of say something about what he saw the software industry, the video games industry at that point was degenerating into. He had a very massive bee in his bonnet about how he was more interested in odd little things. And actually, in recent years, he's said how much he appreciates things like, itch.io and whatnot. So that's why they call it the first art game ever, basically.
It's probably the first art game on this sort of scale, certainly.
Yes, with it has a box, it has like 2 tapes, it had a poster and everything,
I would, unlike the Crystal last episode, this is definitely something worth seeking out.
Yes, it is. Yes,
I do think as many people should at least look at this as possible.
Yeah.
There is nothing else like it.
Yeah. And like even on the scale of like indie games where you have like odd experiences, again, this is a very different kind of experience because it's just all these abstract graphics. You have an actual famous cast doing voices and everything.
I should point out the freeze frame footage is freely available on Facebook, and the link will be in the descriptions. And Deus Ex Machina is available on Steam for about £3, and you might even be able to get it working.
Yes, I was just going to say that, yeah.
And so is Deus Ex Machina 2, actually.
Yeah.
They both are.
Yes. Some people may want to watch, even though it's a different experience, some people may want to see the playthrough on RZX Archive if you want to see it like that.
Yeah, or you might want to just watch it because it's that kind of a thing. Personally, I think you should experience being behind the actual controls just once.
Yeah, like what they say about emulated experiences versus on the original hardware. Sometimes there are situations where you do need to experience it as closely as possible. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've got a proper keyboard with a proper keyboard texture.
Yeah. You don't have what's known as the dead flesh keyboard, which is what they used to call it. Yeah, the proper thing.
But apart from that.
Yeah. So that's it for episode 2, isn't it, of
yes,
Theory of Obscurity. I am Chriddof.
I remain Applemask.
And we will be back hopefully in about 2 weeks' time, which is early July 2020.
Will be July.
Hell year 2020. Okay, goodbye.
Listen to me. You're only obeying orders. Waste someone else's. All you have is hate. War crimes are easy. War crimes are easy. War crimes are easy. And tasty very well. What the hell?